Coming up on this episode of Tom Talks Rubbish.
I'm gonna look back one day at all of these things and I'm gonna find it pretty cool, I think. I think one day if I'm, an old man, hopefully in my 60s or 70s, if I make it there, I can go back and listen to a conversation that 18-year-old me had with one of my best friends about the biggest news of that year. I think that's cool.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Trevor, and today I'm joined by someone I've been trying to get on the show for a while, but I thought they were too big to do this show, I'm not gonna lie. I'm joined by the one and only Robbie Fox from my mum's basement. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Of course, not too big to do this show.
I'm really excited to chat with you. Before we get into any of your work and things like that, my friend, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
Pretty much as long as I can remember, I've been a wrestling fan because I have an older brother who's 12 years older than me, and he grew up a massive fan of the golden era, the Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man, Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase. That era of wrestling was everything to him. So he passed down a bunch of VHS tapes to me, and I want to say my first memory of wrestling was when I was about 3 years old. I saw a VHS tape of Bret the Hitman Hart versus Shawn Michaels in a ladder match that just blew my
Hmm.
mind.
Is that the original ladder match? The one that WWE doesn't want you to know
Yes,
is the
it
first ladder
is. And that was my first memory of wrestling. It was on a VHS tape called WWF's Most Unusual Matches.
match? Why do you think WWE doesn't want you to know about that match? Is it just their revisionist history again?
It might be like, do they want the WrestleMania 10 match to like be more prestigious when people talk about it? It's like, oh, I've heard people say that's like the first WWF ladder match. And as you know, it's not. There's this awesome ladder match between Bret and Shawn Michaels. I think Bret Hart's even a little bit bitter about that, that he doesn't
Mm,
get the credit for making the WWF try something new in a ladder match.
I understand what you're saying completely there. So you talked about discovering wrestling and things like that. As someone whose first match was Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, what is your thoughts on their Iron Man match?
I love their Iron Man match. I know it's controversial. Some people say it's boring. I know Dave Meltzer has said like people were walking out during it. I love it, and I love the sudden death finish. I feel like that's the height of drama. And as far as WrestleMania moments go, it doesn't get much better than the boyhood dream coming true.
Mm. What about and I'm sure you, as a wrestling content creator, you've talked about this to death, but what's your thoughts on the Montreal Screwjob?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's one of the more interesting things to ever happen in the history of wrestling. And
Mm.
I kind of view it as I'm 26 years old, so I was born in 98, obviously wasn't watching that live. As someone that looks back and really appreciates the history of wrestling and the backstage politics, I view that as a pivotal moment, not only for the business, but to introduce new fans too where there's a lot of like talk of, oh, do you know it's fake for new fans? Why do you watch that if it's scripted? Stuff like that. I think you can show them the Montreal screw job and it could kind of sell a casual fan on what's so interesting about wrestling. It's not just the stuff we're watching unfold in the ring, it's the politics and the backstage drama and everything behind it. And then how they took that and created the Mr. McMahon character. And, they really made the best out of an insane situation.
Mm.
I think that's like it's amazing. I've seen 1,000 documentaries on it in my life, and I'll still watch more content on it every time there's new interviews or footage from it.
Favorite wrestling. First of all, favorite documentary. You said you watched maybe 1,000 on the Montreal Screwjob, but favorite Montreal Screwjob documentary, and then favorite overall wrestling documentary.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, wrestling documentaries are one of my absolute favorite things. The way that I learned a lot of what I know about the business. I feel like WWE does such a good job of producing them, and they have for so long. My favorite documentary that specifically covers the screw job might be the Shawn versus Brett Blu-ray they put out. It's like a DVD Blu-ray.
Is
in, I
that the
want to
one where
say
the
2010, 2011-ish,
yeah,
when they're sitting
it's
together talking about it.
and it looks like it's like their
Great,
first
great
meet.
watch.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
Mm,
And I think that they do a great job of talking about it because you don't only get the perspective and the history of what happened, you get how they talk about it with each other all of those
mm.
years later and how it's still touchy. As far as favorite wrestling documentary overall, honestly, I hate to just stick on Shawn Michaels things, but Shawn Michaels was one of my first favorite wrestlers, if not my first favorite. And the Heartbreak and Triumph documentary was a big part of me realizing, he's more than just his second half career. He had this whole first career
Mm.
before the back injury and all that stuff. When I was young, that really put me onto his early stuff, and how great he was, how well rounded he was. So I would say those two, and as an honorable mention, I'll do the Daniel Bryan WWE 24 that led up to his WrestleMania 30 win.
That's a very good one. That's a very good one. You
I
talked
love
about
that one.
Shawn Michaels having two halves of his career. So for you, 90s Michaels or 2000s to 2010 Shawn Michaels?
I'm taking 2000s. I know it might be controversial, but that Michaels, in my mind, that Mr. WrestleMania Michaels, when you look at his absolute insane run, starting at like 19 against Jericho, 20 in the triple threat match, 21 against Kurt Angle, 22 in an amazingly fun match against Mr. McMahon, 23, you've got the main event. It goes on and on, obviously, not even mentioning the Undertaker matches that are
Mm.
some of the best matches of all time. So I'll take post 2000s Michaels. It was also the one I grew up with. The DX Michaels that I grew up with was the '06 DX Michaels. I dressed up as him for Halloween one year. So I'll take 2000s.
What is your thoughts as Michaels is one of your favorites as we move on to sort of your current fandom, Robbie? Michaels' current position in WWE of being like the grandfather of NXT sort of thing.
Yeah. I think it's awesome. I think it's really cool to see how passionate he is about the business and how passionate he is about passing on his knowledge. I saw the video of him just after Roadblock talking to the two women in the main event afterwards and just like giving them a hug, making sure they were okay, and then being like, that was fantastic. Like, you really moved me with that match. Amazing story you told. You could tell that he genuinely still loves wrestling. And I feel like we need people like that in the positions like he's in where it's not someone jaded. It's not someone that's telling the young roster members, oh, back in my day, you got to slow it down and do less this and that. Shawn Michaels is the guy who was like, no, no, I was pushing boundaries in my day. So you push boundaries in your day.
I think what's really cool is I think it was with Chris Van Vliet, but I could be wrong. There was a Grayson Waller clip from an interview, and he was like, "Do you remember when they had the Waller effect?" And Shawn
Yeah.
Michaels was on the Waller effect. Shawn was apparently like, "I don't like doing this stuff anymore." And for Grayson, apparently it was like really cool to see the jovial Shawn Michaels backstage. And then as the camera goes on, you just see almost the lights in Shawn Michaels' eyes change, if that makes sense. And it's
Yeah.
like, I thought that was really cool. Like that perspective is really cool.
It is interesting. Yeah.
Just to move off Shawn Michaels quickly and to bring the mood down slightly, thoughts on his 2018 comeback?
Oh my God. Obviously, as a diehard Shawn Michaels fan, one of the things that I was able to hold on to, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one, was like he took his retirement seriously. He went out on the perfect note, and unlike all the other wrestlers who retired and then said they were never wrestling again, came back, he went back on that. He came back. I'm sure he regrets it. It was such a bad match. I remember watching it live, mid-afternoon and just being like, oh no, Kane's mask coming off, his wig coming off. Everything about that was just cringeworthy. So yeah, I didn't like that. I didn't think it was like career ruining or anything like that. It didn't really like hurt his legacy much for me, but I just wish it didn't happen.
That's really, really cool, my friend. So you talked about your brother getting you into wrestling with VHS tapes, but do you remember the first time you watched wrestling live, for lack of a better phrase?
I do, yeah. It was WrestleMania 19, actually.
Oh
That
wow.
was like a big pivotal moment in my childhood that I remember. I remember seeing Rey Mysterio come out for the first match of the night in a Daredevil outfit, and not realizing as a comic book fan and a wrestling fan that those two things could cross paths. And Rey
Mm.
Mysterio in that moment became one of my favorites because I was just like, oh my God, he likes the same stuff that I like. So I remember watching WrestleMania 19, remember the Hogan versus McMahon street fight. And since then, I haven't missed watching WrestleMania live. Every single time WrestleMania comes around yearly, it's like the Super Bowl for me. I gotta watch it live.
Does that mean you've had a break from watching the traditional week to week wrestling though, Robbie? And you've just stuck
Yeah,
around when Mania seasons come back?
yeah, surely. Like I've never taken like a year off per se, but I've definitely taken months off here or there. Yeah.
Do you remember a moment within your fandom that you're like, okay, I'm good. I'm not going to watch this for a while?
The guest host era of Raw, even as a kid, like I think I was like 10 years old when it was going on, I could recognize that it was not the product that I was really concerned with. And even still then I would be playing the wrestling video games and I would still be like keeping up with what's going on. I would want to know where they were going, who was the champs and stuff like that, who were the rivalries going on. But yeah, I remember that. I remember the lead up to WrestleMania 27 in Atlanta not being for me necessarily. I remember kind of not being super thrilled about that WrestleMania build. Um, and then the COVID era. I definitely fell off a little bit in COVID era. I thought AEW did some good stuff that really picked up where WWE was dropping things, but yeah, there were definitely a few times where I paid less attention than I do actively.
Why, why did WrestleMania 27 just not do it for you?
I don't even necessarily remember. I mean, I know I don't love that card overall. I remember there being a few good matches. I think Ray had a good match. I think
What
it
Cody is
kicked off
memory serves.
well. Yeah, kicked off well with Edge and Alberto Del Rio. And then there was the good Triple H versus Undertaker match. Other than that, I remember the card kind of being lackluster, the main event being Miz and Cena, and we all knew it was really just to set up Cena and The Rock. So
Mm.
I don't know what it was about that, but yeah, that build I remember not loving.
Thoughts on Jerry Lawler versus Michael Cole?
Oh, that one was 27 too. Maybe that was part of the reason
Mm.
was that I remember them going back and forth at each other in commentary every week. It was insufferable.
Mm.
Heel Cole was tough to sit through.
I, I've this is a wrestling hill I will die on, and I want to know your thoughts. If they took Cole off commentary and just made him an on-screen character, Hill Michael Cole would have been really good, in my opinion.
I actually think you might be onto something there because what it was is he couldn't turn it off for any other match. I think that's what you're saying is like
Yeah.
he was taking away from big moments just to be heel Michael Cole, which we all knew was actually just Vince through his headset. It was sounded like he was like talking as Vince basically. So
Mm.
I think if he would have, yeah, just been an on-screen character, it could have worked for sure.
How do you get into this crazy world, my friend? And maybe I've skipped over a few steps. That is the content creation space there.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was like I didn't necessarily intend to be like a wrestling content creator, but I did co-host a podcast called RBR Weekly Wrestling Talk for a long time, a few years before I got hired at Barstool. Once I got hired at Barstool as an intern, I kind of used any kind of connection I had to the wrestling world, which I had picked
Mm.
up while I was in high school, because I was like setting up rings at my local federations, was reaching out to wrestlers and saying, "Hey, I'll design your merch, I'll design your gear, I'll do it for free as long as you could just give me a ticket to the show the next time
Mm.
wherever you're employed comes to town." I just wanted to go to wrestling shows essentially. So I used all of those connections that I had formed once I got to Barstool to do interviews and kind of just start talking about wrestling from a more positive angle was my goal. There was a lot of like negativity in wrestling media, I felt, and I wanted to be more of a voice. So me and my friend Jared Carabas, who I still do wrestling podcasts with,
Mm.
started this podcast called From the Top Rope. We started interviewing wrestlers on there. It was a really good time for a while. It wound up getting canceled after a few months because the downloads just weren't where they needed to be. But we
Was this
kept it
with
going.
Barstool? Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a weird time at Barstool too, because this is like 7 years ago now. I remember we were trying to make like a big push for like Facebook views and views on different platforms that we hadn't necessarily ventured into yet.
Mm.
So because we didn't have like good Facebook numbers, the podcast got canceled. So it was weird, but we still had kind of this fan base that enjoyed us talking about wrestling. So we've kept it going. Years later now, I have a podcast called My Mom's Basement, and we have like we do From the Top Rope on My Mom's Basement. You know, it's
Mm.
more a segment on the show than it is its own show at this point. But we do it anytime there's a big moment in wrestling, a big emergency news break or a big pay-per-view, and we still
I
have fun with
believe
it.
the last one I saw was for Cena's heel turn as we
Of
record
course,
this.
something like that happens, and it's like, all right, we have to talk about this. We have to hop in the basement and get our thoughts out on it. And I'm sure, WrestleMania will probably do either a preview and a post show, maybe just a post show, but, anything big, any of the big four pay-per-views, we feel like it deserves it.
How do you balance that sort of, because you're not in the day to day of wrestling, but obviously you have to be aware of what's going on in wrestling. Because, like you said, you could have to do an emergency podcast. So, how do you balance
Yeah.
that fandom with, oh, I've got to keep an eye on this to maybe take notes in case we got to do a podcast? How do you balance that, Robbie?
Honestly, I think it comes down to I'm such a big fan, especially of the current product. I feel like wrestling's in such a good spot right now
Mm.
that I'm genuinely so interested in all this stuff that if something hits like a Cena heel turn, or I'm trying to think even before this, like the War Games when The Rock came out and did his 3-2-1, we didn't know what that meant, like stuff like that. If it hits hard and it gets us intrigued, me and Jared will be texting each other right away and we'll be like, well, we gotta do a podcast on this. And then I'll dive down the rabbit hole afterwards and kind of do my notes or segment it the way it should be. But I think it's just I'm genuinely so interested in it right now that I want to talk about it.
Where is your current fandom as we record this then? You talk about being so interested. Is that strictly in WWE? Is that all of wrestling? Where is
No.
your fandom?
Yeah, I would say at this point it's mostly in WWE. WrestleMania season always feels special. I love WrestleMania season. It makes me feel nostalgic. It makes me go back and watch old WrestleMania matches, all of that. But I think AEW has been on a good run recently. I think that they went through maybe a little lull a few months ago, but I think they're on an upswing right now. I think GCW is in a fun spot. I find it really fun keeping up with them. New Japan's doing some fun stuff. I know they got a Chicago show coming up soon. Tanahashi's last time in the States. So I would say primarily WWE, but I am not at all married to just one promotion or company.
So, what you talk about not being married to one promotional company there? What is your thoughts on tribalism in wrestling?
See, that is something that irks me when I see it on Twitter for sure, because it's such a I feel like I don't want to say that it doesn't matter. Obviously, like there is something to AEW being an alternative to
Mm.
WWE that makes both companies what they are. But when people put down, oh, AEW's not selling this many tickets, or WWE's been doing this and there's not as much wrestling runtime on their show, it's like right now, I don't find them to be competition. I think that's fair to say. They're not putting up comparable numbers where they're not neck and
Mm.
neck and it's WCW versus WWF back in the day. So I just view it as this awesome alternative show where they have, as we've heard from many wrestlers in AEW are very good friends with wrestlers in WWE. They
Mm.
have a friendly competitive rivalry, I would say, and that they want to put on the best show they can possible. But I don't think if you were to poll the majority of the locker room, AEW people would want WWE to fail. No, and I don't think WWE people would want AEW to fail. I think everyone being great in wrestling is probably what's made wrestling go through a boom period recently. And
Oh,
the boom
definitely.
period kind of started around the time AEW, sprung up and started mixing things up when we were a little bit disappointed by what WWE was giving us. So I really don't like tribalism.
How did my mum's basement start with Barstool then, my friend?
Well, that kind of came off the heels a few years after From the Top Rope was canceled. We were still looking to talk wrestling. I was still looking to talk wrestling. I love interviewing wrestlers. I love interviewing musicians. I am also very into UFC and MMA. I like interviewing fighters. So I wanted a spot where I could talk about all of this stuff. And I kind of pitched My Mom's Basement as a show where I know it's going to be niche. I know it's going to be topics that aren't necessarily for everyone. I know not everyone's into wrestling and
Mm.
fighting and comic books and rock and roll, but maybe there's something for everyone in My Mom's Basement. So I pitched it as a show that maybe you don't listen to every episode, but maybe you listen to the episodes that intrigue you.
Mm.
And we've been doing it now for I want to say 5 years, maybe a little longer, and I've just been having a blast with it. It's such a great spot to work at Barstool because creatively you have so much freedom that if today I want to record a wrestling podcast, I can, and if tomorrow I want to record a podcast about rock and roll history, I can do that as well.
That's really, really cool, my friend. You talked about sort of being able to pick what you want to record. So how do you decide, okay, this was a big event in wrestling this week. This was a big event in Marvel, etc. How do you
Yeah.
decide I'm going to cover this, but also maintain your fandom without getting burned out and things like that?
It actually is a little bit hard to balance everything that I cover sometimes because there is such a wide range. So if something huge happens in MMA the same day as something huge happens in WWE, and let's say there's another huge like Marvel movie, the trailer just dropped or something,
Mm.
sometimes I do have to say, all right, I'm gonna let like say Ken Jack, another guy at Barstool who covers movies and stuff. I'm gonna have to let him cover the movies today, and I'll get to that, at the end of the week when we do our big the main podcast we do of the week, we will try to, wrap everything up in there and at least give an opinion on everything. But yeah, sometimes it's just like you got to make decisions and make the cuts on what's biggest. A lot of the times I'll click on my mentions on Twitter or in my comments on Instagram and see what people are commenting about. If something big happens in wrestling, the listeners of my show From the Top Rope are usually very good at tweeting at me and Jared right away
Mm.
and being like, this is one of the times we want you guys talking about this. And we'll be like, all right, like we'll get the vibe from the listeners.
How did you know it would work with Jared and like chemistry and things like that? Were you friends before you started podcasting?
Honestly, not really. Like we didn't really know, I guess we didn't know it would work, but we both loved wrestling. I knew he loved wrestling and I knew he was really good at podcasting on his own. He had a really successful baseball show that he still does, very successful. It's like the number
Mm.
one baseball show on podcasts. And I knew he was just good at that. So I kind of just trusted that he would carry me through it. And I think he did. Um, and yeah, it just worked out for the best. We didn't really know each other that well before starting the podcast. It was more like an online internet friend relationship than it was an in real life relationship because he also lived in Boston at the time and I was in New York. So
Mm.
eventually he moved to New York. We were able to do it in person, but yeah, it was kind of just taking a swing, seeing if it worked, and we got lucky. It wound up, working out for the best
Is there a bit of sports rivalry between you two with him being in
because of
Boston
Boston
and
and
you
New
being
York.
in New York?
Yeah, we have gone through that before, especially when he doesn't work at Barstool anymore. But when he worked at Barstool, I would like to poke the bear because he's a diehard Red Sox fan. Like he covers Red Sox for a living. He lives, breathes, eats, sleeps Red Sox. And I really like the Yankees, but I'm nowhere near his fandom level. So it'd be fun to just press his buttons. He'd be like, "You don't even care about this." I'd be like, "Isn't that why it's so annoying?" Yeah.
So there's been no between you and him. There's been no John Cena CM Punk moment. This is a very niche reference, but if you guys
No,
all know
no,
who
I
I'm
get
going
it
with,
though.
you have
Yeah,
become the
you've
New York
become what you
Yankees.
hate.
Bang!
No, we haven't gotten there yet, but who knows? Maybe playoffs, Yankees, Red Sox in the future we can get there.
How do you deal with burnout, my friend? Something big happens in wrestling. So tired. I don't want to record this today. How do you deal with that?
It's tough, especially it's easier now with My Mom's Basement where we can decide what we cover in wrestling and really focus in on the big things. But it was tough when we did From the Top Rope and it was a weekly show where we were talking about the news of wrestling. We were talking about Raw, SmackDown, NJPW. We were talking about New Japan at that point. I was really trying to get Jared into New Japan, so this was during the first like Okada Omega trilogy and stuff like that. So I would have him watch matches like that. And I gotta say, I think I did get a little burnt out for sure. I think like after the podcast got canceled, I definitely went on a little more of a lull in my watching. But
Mm.
nowadays, I think it's just with the nature of my mom's basement, I'm just lucky in that if I don't want to talk about wrestling that week, I don't really have to. We could talk Marvel movies or something else.
Have you ever had, because I know when I used to do just the videos I wanted to do on my channel before I niched into the wrestling podcast space, have you ever had someone comment, wait, you're not going to talk about John Cena's heel turn, for example? Have you ever had someone comment, but I thought you'd talk about this week, because this is
Oh
quite new.
yeah. And you know what the worst is I get that and I understand it because if I listen, especially if I put up an hour-long podcast and someone listened to the whole thing expecting us to touch on something and we didn't, I can understand that. But the worst is sometimes we'll put up a podcast and just as I hit upload, massive news
Mhm.
drops.
Oh, yes.
And it's just like, oh, we just recorded this whole conversation. It was great. It worked for the time. And now it's already dated because news dropped that we didn't touch on.
I believe if we're to use a sports analogy, my friend, that is known as the commentator's curse.
Yes, it absolutely is. And we get that so freaking not only on the wrestling podcast, me and my co-host on My Mom's Basement, Clem, will get it from Marvel all the time. We feel like we put out, a huge podcast talking about all the Avengers leaks, news, rumors, breakdown. And then the second it goes up, it's like, oh, Robert Downey Jr. just got cast as Doctor Doom or something crazy like that.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Talking about Marvel for a second, this might be a hard question for you. Favorite Marvel movie of all time?
It is a hard question, but it isn't because I love Avengers Infinity War to such a level. I think it's such a perfect team up movie. It feels like a comic book. I would pair it if I could cheat on the question a little bit with Endgame because I feel like
Mm.
there's such a
1A,
part one,
1B,
part
I
two.
think.
Exactly. Yeah. So and like when I watch Infinity War, it makes me just want to watch Endgame immediately afterwards. So I think those are like absolute peak for Marvel. But my favorite movie of all time is The Dark Knight, which is,
Yeah,
on the flip side, feels, less
my
comic
favorite
booky, feels
movie
more
of all
real,
time,
but
man.
the best.
Is Christian Bale the best Batman?
I think so. He's my Batman. I know not everyone loves his crazy gravelly voice, but for my money, yeah, he's the best.
Why is Dark? I got a bit overexcited when you said Dark Knight was your favorite movie. So why is Dark Knight your favorite movie?
I think it's just the performances, the story. I've seen it more times than I've seen any other movie, probably. I find it the most rewatchable movie in the world. I'll throw it on whenever I'm bored. I'll quote every line. The Heath Ledger performance as the Joker, I think, is like my favorite performance I've ever seen in a movie, just because it's so captivating. I remember seeing it on opening day. It just every time I watch it reminds me of that day, how absolutely excited and just like flabbergasted I was with the movie, the action sequences, everything about it. It's just the greatest movie of all time, I think.
That's really, really cool. And as I said, it's my favorite movie, so I cannot argue with that whatsoever,
Yeah.
my you make your chemistry different with Jared than when you do with your Barstool co-host? Does that make sense? Or your
Yeah,
My
yeah.
Mum Placement co-host? How do
It's
you
a
make
good
that?
question. I haven't thought about that. I think it just comes naturally. I think me and Jared tend to butt heads more about wrestling. Although now that I think about it, me and my co-host Clem, we do butt heads about certain Marvel movies sometimes. I tend to be more positive than him. He's usually more he can call it down the line. He could watch a movie and be like, "Yeah, I didn't love that one." I watch a movie and I have recency bias. I'm like, wasn't that awesome? Like, I'm ready. And then
Mm.
like a week passes and I'm like, all right, I've calmed down. I understand your point there. But yeah, I think it just comes naturally. I never consciously think about making the chemistry different or anything like that.
What has been your biggest sort of recency bias movie recently? Then you're like, okay, I've calmed down now. I'm good.
That's a good question. Um, I would say a lot of the recent Marvel stuff has maybe felt like that, where sometimes I look back at my takes on the Eternals when that first came out. I was pretty pro Eternals. The Flash
Some
was
thoughts
a
on that
DC
movie.
one, huh?
I have some thoughts on that Eternals movie.
Eternal. Well, I was pretty like leaving the theater, I was like, they went for something different. It didn't feel like a Marvel movie. It felt very unique. It felt more DCU in tone because it was a little darker and stuff. And then like a few months have passed, and I haven't even, I mean, over a year's passed, I'm sure, and I've never had the urge to go back and rewatch that movie, which makes me
Mm,
think, oh, you know what? Maybe it wasn't that great. But like The Flash, I think, is a good example where I left The Flash being like, that was pretty good. Like I expected a disaster. I loved all the Michael Keaton Batman stuff. Now looking back at The Flash, I'm kind of like, I think all I liked was the Michael Keaton Batman stuff. So stuff like that.
I understand what you're saying completely there. Apologies, guys. My mic just completely cut out just before Robbie was talking, so that's why I was fiddling about. I do apologize, my friend.
Oh, all good. I didn't even notice.
That's really, really cool. So we talked about your fandom and things like that, and we've talked a little bit about burnout. But what would your advice be? Because you said you started at Barstool as an intern and things like that, and you've really worked your way up. So, what would you say to Robbie, who's starting as an intern, who's maybe thinking, "This isn't for me," or "I don't want to be an intern"? What would your advice be to him?
It's a good question. I would say stay consistent. Consist like it's such a cliche. Consistency is key is the most cliche thing in the world, but I really do think staying consistent with everything across the board is so important. Getting in a routine, I think, is so good. Even just personally, mentally, being in a routine just like makes me feel good, makes me feel prepared for things. So stay consistent with everything. And I've never been one to burn bridges or make enemies. It's something that like people joke about at Barstool because we're kind of a reality show here. There's people fighting and joking and whatever.
Mm,
But I've never been one to really like get into fights here. And that's something that um maybe I did a little bit even as an intern because I felt like coming into Barstool as an intern, as I was a longtime fan, so I knew the culture could be you're throwing jabs at each other all day. I was on the defensive at all times. I would say maybe
mm.
just calm down. Don't be on the defensive as much. There's no reason to get into fights like that because you make good connections and you just stay friends with people and you never know what's going to come next.
Mm. Or this is completely niche and blind up my spot. You send someone a super chat, they might come on your podcast.
Exactly. Exactly.
I so here's the thing. What was your I'm just genuinely curious. What was your reaction when I said, "Will you come on my podcast?" Did you think, well, that's a bit cheesy?
No, I saw it and I thought it was very kind of you. I was like, of course, yeah. I thought it was very nice. I'm still very new to the streaming game, so I still like don't fully understand the super chats, but I was told like maybe two streams ago, the person who helps me with my streams, Nick Hamilton, he was like, "Oh, I set it up so if any super chats come in, they'll be read to you live." And I didn't even fully understand that, but now that I'm into it, I'm enjoying the streaming too. I think that could be, I don't even know if it's working, but I think it could be a new realm for me just because I'm having fun with it.
I really enjoyed your to peel the curtain back, your showcase mode on the new WWE game. I
Oh,
thought
thank you.
you had a lot of talent as a streamer, and I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I spent the weekend making some creator wrestlers for like the future of my streams. I only made three so far. I
Ooh.
made myself, did not really look like me, if I'm being honest. I gotta go back and edit it because I didn't do a great job. And then I made Liam and Noel Gallagher, and I thought they really looked like them.
That's really, really cool. Why do Oasis speak to you then, my friend, as a fan?
It's a good question. I just love rock and roll so much, and I feel like they embody the rock and roll spirit of days past of more the 70s even than when they came up in the 90s. Maybe it's something about them being brothers that I also think it's awesome. Like me having a brother that's a drummer, I'm a bass player. Me and my brother have been able to play together. We don't get into fights like Liam and Noel
Oh
at all.
yeah,
We're the opposite in that realm. But yeah, I
Soft Punk, I believe
really
is the
got
name, right?
yes, it's pop punk. I got some of this stuff behind me. That bandana is a pop punk bandana. Um but yeah, I liked Oasis music growing up. Like I didn't know a ton of it, as most Americans, I feel like. I just liked what I heard. And then when the documentary came out that told a lot of us about their history, the Supersonic documentary, that just made me go down the rabbit hole. And I've been a diehard fan ever since.
That's really, really cool, my friend. Where was I going with that? So, what is something maybe you don't cover on My Mum's Basement or your wrestling podcast that you're like, I'd like to cover that more if we could?
It's a good question. I've thought about dipping my toe in the extreme sports realm before. I've interviewed Travis Pastrana, who's like, one of the absolute X Games legends, double
Mhm.
backflip on a motorcycle, all stuff crazy like that. I've definitely dipped my toes in that. I would say, yeah, maybe even more niche music stuff. Like I really love covering up and coming bands, and that stuff never does as well because I think my audience is more here for wrestling or UFC than music. But I really, really enjoy that kind of stuff. I would even love, um, I would say, yeah, either extreme sports, more niche music stuff, or even like production things. Like I've thought before, I think it's fascinating how stages come up. Like
Mm.
when you're putting together a world tour, like to watch my family, my dad and my brother and my uncles and stuff were stagehands on Broadway. So
Oh,
I would
wow.
sometimes get a peek behind the curtain of how things work. And I think that stuff is fascinating. And I don't know if it would really work or other people would find it fascinating, but I've thought about dipping my toes in that as well. Like time lapse videos of stadiums going from a basketball stadium to they get it ready for hockey like MSG and then they get it ready for a concert all in the same week. I think that's fascinating.
I'd be fascinated to see that from a wrestling perspective. I'm not gonna lie. From
Even
like
that, like wrestling fans, we get the helicopter pictures of the WrestleMania stage getting assembled every year. And that like gets us excited. Like I would love to talk to the people that build the stage and design the stage and find out more about that.
what's your favorite WrestleMania stage?
That's such a good question. I like some of the simplistic ones, like WrestleMania 28 in Miami. I really loved how that was low and they put the fans on top. They did the same thing. They've done it a couple times, but they did the same thing in Santa Clara for 31. I thought that looked amazing. The New Yorker in me kind of wants to say 29 when they did the Brooklyn Bridge and the
I really
skyline
like
and
20 in New York, to be fair.
20 was great as well when they were able to do the skyline and when Kane came out, it all lit on fire and
Yes, I
stuff.
was just gonna say
Yeah,
that, funny enough.
that was awesome. That was awesome. I even thought um 39 XL was good in Philly, but 39, the Hollywood setup with kind of the stage that looked like it had stairs. I thought that was really cool too.
The worst stage, and we know why, is 36, right? But even then, they made the performance center
Yeah.
work, in my opinion.
They did. They did the best they could with it, and ending the nights with like the cinematic matches, the Bray and Cena one, and then Undertaker's last match, or if you even want to call it a match, his last brawl. I thought they made the best of it.
Which cinematic match is better, in your opinion? Brian Cena or Taker AJ?
I think Taker AJ, just because it felt more like I don't know, that felt like it deserved to close Mania. The Cena Wyatt one is great, but I feel like I just remember the moments from it. I remember him coming out in the NWO thing. I don't remember as much the whole brawl in the graveyard. I don't even know. It wasn't a graveyard, but it was just like a barn, farm, whatever that
I
was. I
think it
thought that
was a
was awesome.
park that they set up to look like a
It
graveyard.
sort of was, yeah. It was cool. I liked that.
That's really, really cool. Before we wrap this up, Robbie, I have a bit of a self-indulgent question that I want to
Okay.
ask you. It's a great podcaster yourself. Where can I improve? What did you enjoy about this conversation? Everything in between.
Oh, good question. It's like a performance review, like mid podcasts. I think you've been great. You've asked me a lot of questions that I've never been asked before. So I thought you've kept this very engaging. You've kept it interesting. I don't know. I have no demerits. I have no knocks. I think this has been great.
I think my only thing, and I should have asked my carers when they were here earlier, was sort my headphones out because this is very uncomfortable currently, if you know what I mean.
Your tangled wires.
Yeah. So as we
It's
wrap this
fine
up,
by
Robbie,
me. It doesn't affect me.
no, I understand what you're saying, but as we wrap this up, I have two questions for you before we do a question segment that is staple on my channel called generic
Mhm.
wrestling questions. Um, If you stepped away from podcasting tomorrow and sort of said, okay, I've had enough, I've achieved what I wanted to do, would you view your podcasting career as a success? And what would you want your legacy to be?
I think I would. And I think maybe some people, if you're familiar with my podcasting career, you might laugh at that and be like, what do you mean it's a success? Because I haven't really, like, none of my podcasts have gone viral or blown up or anything like that. But for me, a big part of podcasting and why I always encourage other people to do podcasts is I think it's just cool to have a library full of conversations with
Mm,
your friends, with people you interview. I'm going to look back one day at all of these things and I'm going to find it pretty cool, I think. I think one day, if I'm, an old man, hopefully in my 60s or 70s, if I make it there, I can go back and listen to a conversation that 18-year-old me had with one of my best friends about the biggest news of that year. I think that's cool. So I think the fact that I've put together at this point at least probably 500 episodes of My Mom's Basement and From the Top Rope and all of these other podcasts, I just find it cool that one day there's going to be a library of everything I thought of these things in the moment from when they happened. And as far as legacy, I hope people look back and say, I was a nice guy
mm.
and like I have this tattoo. Why not? And it's a big Kevin Smith thing. I'm a big Kevin Smith fan,
Oh, yeah.
and he's a director and actor and all that stuff. And he basically says, be the person that says why not at every angle. When someone says, "Hey, I'd like to start a new podcast," or "Hey, I'd like to shoot a new movie," or "I'm about to start a script," be like, "Hey, why not? Maybe that'll work out." Don't be the
Mm.
guy that says why. Why would you do that? There's already a million out there. I would like for my legacy to be the why not guy, to be the guy who's always, willing to lend a hand or willing to help out if you're trying to start something new or if a friend of mine is trying to start a new project. Like, let's see what we can make of this. Why not?
I think that's really cool. And I think, like I said, you've got such a big following that I'm really grateful that you took the time to do my show. I'm not gonna lie.
Of course. Yeah. Another thing where it's like, why not? Like, this was a great conversation. We got a great conversation out of this. I'm glad I did it.
I'm really pleased to hear that, my friend. But as we wrap this up, Robbie, obviously I want to say thank you for a great conversation. But we're going to do a segment that is a staple on this channel called Generic Wrestling Questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before, and that's where I'll ask Robbie his favorite match, favorite pay-per-view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019, his favorite wrestler's entrance theme, favorite tag team, favorite wrestler, and the biggest generic question, his favorite wrestler of all time. Basically, the questions I assume you're asked on social media, my friend, as a wrestling fan. So now you'll have a place to be like, guys, I have answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
I've gone back and forth on this a lot, but I'm going to say it is Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 25. And it's almost the Dark Knight of matches for me to make
Mm,
a movie analogy with it because it's the greatest of all time in my opinion, but it did sort of ruin what came after it for me in a
mm,
little aspect. I think a lot of wrestlers now look at that match and they say, we got to do finisher kick out, finisher kick out, finisher kick out. And that's not necessarily what makes the match so great. It's that it wasn't happening at that point. And The Dark Knight is similar in that I think a lot of people saw The Dark Knight and they said, oh, to make a good superhero movie, you got to make it super realistic. And that's also
mm.
not necessarily what makes The Dark Knight so great. So to make both of those into one, make a wrestling comic comparison, which is kind of what we do a lot on my podcast anyway. I would say it's Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, the Dark Knight of matches.
That's really, really cool. What about your favorite overall pay-per-view card?
This is one where I struggle not to go generic and straight up just say WrestleMania 17. But WrestleMania 17 is so good when you look at it top to bottom. It really is the perfect slate of matches. So I'm going to take it in a different direction. And I'm going to go very nostalgic for me, WrestleMania 20. I also believe WrestleMania 20 is an amazing card. And it was
Mm.
one of the first ones that I really remember and remember watching live. And I could go back and I could throw on WrestleMania 20 right now and have a great time with it.
Can you watch the ending of WrestleMania 20 given the circumstances?
It's weird. I was such a Benoit fan as a kid. Like I can watch it, and it's that triple threat main event is amazing. I think it's one of the best triple threat matches of all time. But it's not like a feel good ending anymore, you know. So that's weird. That takes it down a peg for sure. But if you were to remove that and just the card itself, I think it's so good. Other than, of course, the Lesnar Goldberg thing.
I still think that's an okay match if you just turn the crowd
It's
off.
fine. The crowd just like ruins it. Exactly. Like if the crowd were there to make it a decent match, it would have been much better. I was at WrestleMania 31, and it felt like the crowd was going to hijack that main event before it happened, Lesnar and Reigns for the first time. And instead, we just got this awesome, almost hostile crowd environment where everyone was booing Reigns, but they were cheering Lesnar. And then we got the Rollins cash in to just cap the night off on a perfect moment. Honestly, WrestleMania 30 and 31 would be in the mix for me as far as favorite pay-per-view cards. I think both of those cards are awesome.
That's really, really cool. Just quickly, as someone that was at 31, what is your thoughts on A, Orton's RKO out of a curb stomp, and then B, the Sting Triple H stuff?
So the RKO out of the curb stomp, for my money, that's the best one of all time. That one was so shocking. I could picture it from where I was sitting at WrestleMania. It was one of those like immediately core memory seeing that live. Couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then the Sting Triple H match was awesome live. And I think Dave Meltzer says the same thing because he was there, I remember. Awesome live. Then you go back and you watch it with the commentary and it doesn't hit as hard as it did live. But I swear, being in the building and hearing the DX and NWO music hit, it was insane. Does it make total sense that the NWO is teaming up with Sting?
Oh,
Not
hell
really.
no.
But I mean, Magneto teamed up with the X-Men and X2. You know, sometimes for dire consequences, you got to do what you got to do. Live in the building, though, it was awesome.
What was the other question I was going to ask? Oh, yeah. Undertaker's entrance, does it work in the daytime?
No, it does not. We were all praying that the sun would go down before Taker versus Bray, or I was really hoping that he would come out as the American Badass. I thought if he came out on the motorcycle, then maybe it does work, because I guess it
Mm,
did at WrestleMania 19. He had the handicap match, but the Dead Man doesn't work in the daytime.
that's really, really cool. And what about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme, Robbie?
I want to say DX. I know a lot of people would say Stone Cold Steve Austin or maybe The Undertaker himself, but when I was a kid, when I was creating myself in the WWE games in SmackDown versus Raw or anything like that, it was always the black and green attire, the DX theme.
Thoughts on the DX band performance at Mania 14?
They did our country dirty. It was the worst
I
national anthem of all time.
think that was
But
Mania
really
14,
funny to
wasn't
show
it?
people, huh?
I think that was Mania 14, wasn't
I think it was, yeah. I think you're right about that. It is that's a funny clip to show non-wrestling fans as well. Like you want to see like, yeah, I know you know the bad national anthems that have happened like at the Super Bowl or like a giant MLB game, the World Series. You want to see one that happened at WrestleMania and you show them that one.
it? It can't be as bad as Mean Gene at Mania 1. I'm sorry, but it can't.
Yeah.
He just done
True.
that like he was desperate for the. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
What about your favorite tag team, Robbie?
Favorite tag team of all time would have to be the Hardy Boys. Growing up in the era of the Hardy Boys, and not even, I guess my era would be the post era of the Hardy Boys for a lot of people because there's 2000s Hardy Boys. But me and my friend Chris just wanted to be them every day in school. It would be like, oh, which one of us gets to be Jeff? You know, everyone wants to be Jeff. But then seeing Jeff break off and go for world titles and see Matt go and reinvent himself with the delete stuff, like I'll always be a Hardy Boys fan at in my core because they're just the best.
That's really, really cool. And then finally, Robbie, the biggest generic question in my opinion. Who is your favorite overall wrestler of all time?
Call him Brian Danielson, call him Daniel Bryan. I don't care what you call him. I call him the GOAT, my favorite of all time. I really could have, for my favorite match of all time, gone with the WrestleMania 30 main event, just because I followed his career so closely from the time he signed to WWE. I can't claim to know about his indie career before he signed.
Mm.
But once he signed in '09, I was 11 years old. I went and did the research and I watched all of his Ring of Honor matches and every match I could get my hands on back then. And really, he was my guy from then on through his WWE career. So to see him rise the ranks, main event WrestleMania, and then get his boyhood dream moment was just incredible. So even the stuff that he did in AEW after that was so good. Some of the 60-minute matches, some of the matches that he had with Kenny Omega, with Will Ospreay, with Hangman Page, with MJF. He's just the style that he wrestles is perfect for me. The guy who grew up a Shawn Michaels fan. It feels like an offshoot of Shawn Michaels, a little more underdog fury, a little more British world of sports style. And that's perfect in my opinion.
That's really, really cool. As we wrap this up, guys, obviously I want to say thank you to Robbie for a great conversation. But the question I end this show on is, I believe as YouTube podcasters, even just people with social media, we're all sort of gonna live forever in a way, if you think about the way. So what is one piece of content you're like, I'd like to be remembered for that? And then what is one that you're like, nah, you guys can forget about your content?
Oh, all right. So I'm gonna say if you could take one piece of my content that you remember me by, it's going to be a vlog that Pup Punk put out this year. And it's us playing Freebird by Leonard Skinner after practicing it once. We
Oh
had
wow.
like one opportunity to go in and practice it, and it was really special because we brought my brother in to play drums on it, and we brought our guitar player's brother in to duel the solo. So it was dueling brothers on stage. And it's just like it went so well in front of a sold out crowd that was much bigger than we anticipated. It feels like the peak of like what we've done in pop punk so far for sure. As far as like a piece of content you don't want to remember me by, there's definitely been some interviews over the years that have been like rough. I remember like I had a rough one with Samoa Joe. I think I pissed Samoa Joe off back in the day. I asked him if he thought Rey Mysterio was the top 10 wrestler of all time. And he was like, "You're trying to get me into one of these clickbait articles, aren't you?" And I was like, "No, I swear I'm not, Joe. Please, no." I don't even know if that's still up because it was on the from the top rope feed, which I don't think still exists. But
Mm,
it might be one of those bad interviews. I would say yeah, maybe like a Samoa Joe interview I did.
that's really, really cool, man.
And I like Joe too. I've done interviews with him since that. It's all good, but yeah, we've had some stinkers.
Oh, we all have those stinkers.
Of
Like
course, you do enough, you got stinkers.
I've done as we record this, 204. Yeah, you'll be 204, I believe.
Wow.
It's still very much like, how did I get here? Like people like you are coming on my show. That's still very weird. Anyway, before this gets as we wrap this up, obviously I want to say thank you to Robbie for a great conversation. But please promote yourself. I'm sure they're following you already. But where can the good people find you if they're not following you already?
Yeah, so on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, I'm at Robbie Barstool. You spell Robbie Robbie, not Robby. On Instagram, I'm that Robbie Fox. And then all my stuff is just on YouTube, My Mom's Basement. Tons of interviews, hopefully some stuff leading into WrestleMania. I would love to hopefully get some WWE talent in, some superstars. Um, and yeah, that's it. Video game streams every week now, My Mom's Basement. All of it's on the My Mom's Basement page.
It's well worth doing, guys. One of the hardest working people in this space, just in any creative space, really, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. It's Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter or X at Tom Talks Rubbish, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.
Thanks for watching this Tom Talks Rubbish conversation. Before you go, please make sure you leave a like on the video, share it around, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube, as well as follow Tom Talks Rubbish on Twitter/X.